If we could start the meeting, can I welcome you all to the Cabinet this evening? And we've got quite a body of business to go through. And if I could start by advising people that the meeting is being filmed and a copy will be on the Council's website. It doesn't come out live, though, not yet. We're not quite at that stage. So it will be on there tomorrow or something, yeah? And it will be, I meant to remind members to not speak unless I direct them to, which sounds very stern. It never stops them, but it's worth a try. But you need to turn your microphone, otherwise it won't be picked up, and history will not record your pearls of wisdom. Do we have any apologies?
I've just had a message. Sorry, I've just had a message from the chair of ONS, and I've got a really weird echo.
Is there any reason why it should sound like an echo chamber?
Hello, is that better? Just to say, the chair of ONS is running about 20 minutes late, but he's on his way. Councillor Pearce. So apologies for lateness.
Am I happy to do this? Yes. Right. Okay. And I'm allowed to address the meeting now. And I was going to address something in the presence of the Chair of ONS, which is he presented to me the other day the ONS Scrutiny Committee Transparency Commission final report, which I'm sure is required bedtime reading for all badly behaved children in the borough. And we're going to respond to that. It's consistent with most of what we've done already. There's a few extra bits in terms of transparency, and obviously ONS has to have ownership of its own approach to transparency. The other thing I wanted to say, and I haven't advised officers of this, but I'll get myself into trouble for it, is that I'm very mindful that we've got, I think, all the Whitechapel Master Plan, which we tend to support, and we've got the beginnings or quite a lot of detailed applications coming from developers, and there's a view that we need to look very carefully, not at the principle of the Whitechapel development, but at some of the scale of what's being proposed, in particular the heights of buildings. It may well be that development can achieve similar levels of housing as proposed, but we've found some of the proposals rather alarming. Our legal officer is now looking at me very alarmingly, but I'm not a planning decision maker, I'm merely a policy maker, so I can say these things. And the people on the planning committee, none of whom are present, can reflect on them at another time. Sharia's present. Okay. You're on development, not strategic development. Okay. So I wanted to say that, and I think actually what I also wanted to say was, and this isn't just because I met them today, because I met them several times actually, there are proposals for a medical sciences development at Whitechapel in the master plan area, and I just wanted to emphasise that from my understanding at present, we need to do a bit more work about how it might benefit our borough, but it would be very much tied around genome research, and on the face of it is a very exciting development for the East End. I know the Mayor of London likes it, I know the previous Mayor liked it, I quite like it as well. We want to look at how we might benefit from it, but we want to try to encourage that to happen. It will be a big benefit for the UK, and it will be quite a big benefit for our university and for our medical school and for residents as well in terms of employment and in terms of this becoming a centre of medical excellence which will provide superb care facilities for people as well. So I wanted to plug that, and again, because I'm not a planning decision maker, that doesn't fetter my discretion there, but hopefully we can do some work with people to help that to happen and encourage the various parties to agglomerate around the right decision on that. If I could move on, do members have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests?
I have one, Chair.
Okay. And do you want to do yours?
So my interest is related to item 5.3, so it's more personal declaration of interest in the interest of transparency. So the report talks about the Housing Capital Programme, so I, as a council tenant, my block is included in Appendix 4 of the report.
And there are one or two leaseholders here as well, so Rachel and I, as somebody gets here, are leaseholders, and they may be affected by those decisions, but I don't think in a way that disqualifies them from participating. Shall we move on then to item 3, which is unrestricted minutes of the 5th of January are presented for agreement. Are we happy with those? Yep. Okay. Now, this is where we need to this is where we need to think about the order of business. But basically, I think that I'm very indulgent. I want ONS to have a chance to speak here, but we can't hold up the meeting. So the chair of ONS wants to speak, and in particular, I'm told he wants to comment on the agenda in general, but 5.7 in particular. So we'll make sure we don't deal with that item before he gets here. So we're happy to wait until he gets here before we take item 4.1. And there have been no call-ins under 4.2, so that's pretty straightforward. I know that Councillor Golds is here from the Conservative group, and he wants to speak on 5.4 and 5.5. So when we get to those. So if I could move on then to item 5.1, General Fund Revenue and Capital Budget and Medium-Term Financial Plan 16-17, which is one of these 3 volumes, and Councillor Edgar.
Thank you. Having the 30-minute introduction to this report when it appeared largely in this form at the last meeting, I will give the much shorter introduction this time and simply highlight the changes. So there were 3 changes that the Mayor agreed to the savings in the budget last time, and they are all being reflected in this report. So the proposal that we save money by closing some or all of the Idea stores on Sunday was one that was knocked out at the last meeting, as was a proposal to save money by reducing corporate match funding, because we need that funding, so it made sense to hold on to it, and also a proposal about daycare services, which was going to depend for its implementation on there being a alternative in place, and at the moment we don't know when that's going to be, so that was not bad. One other change that comes into this paper is the apprenticeship levy, something that the government's introduced that all larger employers have to pay. In the earlier version of the report, that came in, it was reflected as coming in April 2016. It's coming in April 2017, so that's been changed by 1 year, which I think has an impact of about £800,000. Now, following the last Cabinet meeting, there was a long discussion at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 18th of January, and there are a number of points raised at that meeting, some of which were about the information that was available and making sure that fuller information was available in the further budget reports. But there were also a number of proposals about things that they would like the Mayor to reconsider, and he might want to comment on some of the points that came up there. But my understanding is the Mayor doesn't propose to make changes, having very carefully, with a number of colleagues, thought about each of those recommendations from Overview and Scrutiny. I think the Mayor believes that those savings that they were suggesting get reconsidered, there's still ones that need to be made in this year, if you think about the implications for some of them and the way in which we've got an overall challenge over the next few years in having to save very considerable amounts of money. The position is that we still haven't got a final settlement letter for telling us exactly what the situation is financially for Tower Hamlets. So there's an additional recommendation within this report which asks the Mayor to agree that the Corporate Director Resources, in consultation with the Mayor and the Cabinet Member for Resources, makes any required changes to the budget following the settlement letter, which it's imagined will be received in February. But I think that's the only new recommendation that is a significant amendment on what came to the last meeting. But John may well want to say a bit about the response to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee comments.
Now here's a helpful question. Can you remind me of the list of savings, you or Zena?
List of savings.
The list of savings which, sorry, I don't
Yeah,
know. So on page 71 is the list of proposed savings. The list of savings which ONS, I hadn't finished that
They're on
sentence.
page 508 and 509.
Okay.
So right at the back.
Okay, so I'm very happy to address those. And in terms of the review, so many of them were requesting, so 1 and 2 are requesting more information. 3 and 4, I think, the same. And the 5 and 6 was about savings proposals relating to bursaries for people seeking training to become teachers. And I think we had some further information about this. Who can advise me on that? Because I think we were fairly clear that this was a particular scheme targeted at teaching assistants who were seeking to train as teachers, and that the demand in that area had massively changed. There was a question at ONS about whether we're marketing the opportunity to retrain as teachers sufficiently to people, and I think specifically in the Somali community, but not just in the Somali community, and that we need to give some thought to that. But I took the view that wasn't particularly affected by this savings proposal. Now, go on.
I think that, as I understand it, I think that's absolutely correct, and I thought it was covered off, Mayor.
And we then had representations about the incontinence laundry service, and I don't think ONS recommended a change in that. And indeed, generic work in the waste service, more information which is being made available to them. School crossing patrols, again, well, they wanted that to be reconsidered. Now, I know there's been quite a bit of work with the schools and the forum about the delegated schools budget and about schools' ability to pay for this service. And could you perhaps clarify that, Rachel or Debbie?
There has been discussion in the schools forum. As colleagues will be aware, there are only a relatively small number of schools that still have school crossing patrols that are provided through us. A lot of them are already providing it themselves, and indeed there was very little comment from the schools forum in relation to this when it was discussed.
Okay. And then moving on, probably the most significant in monetary terms was the recommendation about paying for police services. Now, I think it's worth me saying a couple of points about this then, which is essentially that there's been some discussion of our historic, and I think I've been involved in this in various capacities, our historic spending of council resources on buying extra police officers. Now, we've spent quite a bit of time discussing both in open and closed meetings of the Cabinet, not that we have secret meetings, but we have preparatory meetings where we talk frankly about policy issues on antisocial behaviour in the borough, and I'm fairly clear from those conversations, and our officers haven't contradicted this, that the more appropriate thing to do with this resource is to spend it on improving our part of the deal, if you like, which is about tackling antisocial behaviour. Increasingly, if we employ police officers, they are unlikely to be deployed to deal with antisocial behaviour on housing estates unless there's a very clear and immediate criminal offence taking place, and even then their response times may not be as quick as people would like them to be. What's really important, and comes back to us again and again from surveys across the borough, is the very real anxiety about antisocial behaviour. And one of the priorities I've indicated, and this budget indicates again, is that we put additional energy into the ASB service. It's worth, just in case anyone misunderstands this, it's worth making the point that yes, we clearly want more police officers in the borough, and we want the Mayor of London, whose primary responsibility is to fund the police service, to fund those. We will still be securing a number of police officers to deal with a number of areas of antisocial behaviour, and particularly tackling issues of street prostitution and other issues where they have powers of arrest which local authority officers cannot intervene in. But the sort of things we want to do is to have a complementary service, which is about having our ASB Theo teams, about looking at our youth service, how it responds, about working with housing providers to make sure we have a comprehensive response to antisocial behaviour issues on estates, and a range of things around that which will better, in our view, deal with the anxieties expressed by residents about how that resource is deployed. I'm very happy other members want to speak on that, but the next one then was about mainstream grants, 15 and 16 on page 509. And on that one, I'm trying to be comprehensive on this because ONS did raise these concerns. The reality on this is that it's a very small reduction in the mainstream grants budget, more like 2.5%, I think, in the overall budget. Is that right?
It's only 2.5% on the DNR element, the development renewal element in next year.
Okay, and that's money which hasn't been spent, I think, and I think it's at a time when we're making savings across the rest of the council's budget. To make a currently quite small saving on our mainstream grants budget is not unreasonable in our view, and there are underspends during the year. That doesn't signal that we're planning to slash our grants budgets, but we do have, and we still have a relatively generous grant funding programme compared to many other London boroughs. I think that's right, is it? Yep. Okay. The burial subsidy scheme. Take me through our thinking on that, Councillor Edgar, if you can remind me, because it's quite complicated, and we wanted to spend quite a bit of time marketing and promoting the various subsidies that exist, such as the subsidies in the new burial ground in Sidcup.
Yeah, I suppose part of thinking on this is that my understanding is that the original burial subsidy scheme was introduced at a time when the council, well, residents in the borough didn't have access at all easily to a burial place that was supported in some way by the council. Over a longer period of time, the site was bought outside of the borough, but one that's available to residents and has a large number of places. It is subsidised by the council. The take-up of that has been fairly low, and so a part of what it seems to me we need to do is to make sure that people are aware of it and able to use it. And at the moment, we're not communicating, it seems, well enough about that particular option. And there is also, just to be clear, support from public funds available in situations where, for whatever reason, there simply isn't the money to pay for a burial. And the actual scheme that's been proposed for deletion is one that I think during the last financial year or during this financial year hasn't actually been in use, because some time ago it was suspended before your election, Mayor, and the unravelling of that suspension hasn't happened. So in effect, during the last year, we've not had anybody making use of that particular scheme. So I think we're in a situation where the council has achieved what it intended to for the longer term, which was to get a burial place in place. And what we need to do is to make sure that people are aware of that and are able to use that well.
Okay, and yes, and I think that's a very good summary of where we are with that. And I think additionally, were we to want to reintroduce that particular scheme, it would have to be scrutinised by the commissioners who have indicated on similar proposals that they are not convinced that that's an appropriate use for a grant. But I can't put words into their mouths. But anyway, it was suspended prior to my election, which explained why there was a very limited take-up on it. Although I wasn't aware until very recently that it had been suspended prior to my election, which in an organisation that spends over £1 billion, I suppose, some things do slip through. I'm a bit disappointed that that was the case. Right, shall we move on? I'm happy to agree the recommendation, which is basically to note this. Now, we need to be clear about what happens next in terms of public records. So this is me recommending our budget, which will go now to the ONS committee again. No, it goes straight to the full council.
If there have been any material amendments to the budget today, then those would need to be considered by ONS, but there haven't been, and so it won't need to go back to the Overview Scrutiny Committee, as I understand it.
Okay, so it goes to the full council. Sorry to labour this point, but it is quite an important part of the annual processing of the council, and so it goes to the council in about 3 weeks' time, where it is either agreed at that meeting, or if it isn't agreed at that meeting, it is passed back for us to think about, and then goes to a council meeting at the beginning of March. Now, the beauty of having agreed item 5.1 now is that it's given Councillor Pearce, coincidentally, an opportunity to get here and to get his breath, and he can now, if we go backwards to 4.1, brief us from his role as Chair of ONS.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this month we've had, well, in the previous months we've had quite a busy time, and it's clear that you have just approved your commitments for the budget process. The committee made a number of recommendations for you to consider a number of proposals, and you have the decision that you have before you. I think for us it's still disappointing that at the stage that we were at, we were still asking for clarity and for further information. I think we set a challenge. We set a challenge to the directorates to be able to come back and to be accountable and to provide us with the information that we need as a scrutiny committee. And I think some really, got that and were able to offer a lot of detail, and even going into scenarios and actually putting it into plain English that local people would be able to understand. I think it was a real challenge with some other teams, and I think we all know the scale of the the challenge next year and what is proposed in this document. And I sort of think we really need to up the game now going into that, because people will see and be deeply concerned about the savings that will have to be made. And I sort of think, this year was a really big improvement on the year before. I think if you listen to what the unions have to say about it, they were scathing when they came to ONS and talked about it. But I sort of think, I think people found it easier to engage and to have questions answered. But I sort of think in terms of, from stage one going out and to be able to make a clear case in writing what the proposals are, then I think some work needs to be done on that going forward. And there are examples from other councils who provide a lot of information, even going out to public consultation. And I think given the transformational change that will need to happen, I think more information from the very start would be very helpful for scrutiny going forward. On Friday, I presented you with the report of the Overview and Scrutiny Transparency Commission, and it's now going through the internal processes of the council, and I look forward. And I think this accountability and local people being able to see what the decision making is just really key going forward. And I think there's been a lot of movement on it, and I think more needs to be done. So moving on, at last night's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We looked at the local plan and discussed really the opportunities that were there. I think members really had a discussion on sort of betting shops and heritage and housing for key workers. And I know work has been done on that, but I think, we were quite supportive of the way the process had gone already. We then looked at the community safety partnership plan extension and had quite a lot of discussion around it and the impacts on the local community, and there's a really good debate on it. A lot of discussion focused on prevent. The scrutiny committee is now going to do a sort of an overarching review on how prevent works across the council and how local partners engage in that. And I think, hopefully as many councillors will engage and participate. And I think there's a really big opportunity and a really big piece of work for us to do there. And so we will take that forward. And then we looked at, and this is a really good debate around recruiting more diverse school governors. And we looked at the constraints given the recent changes in the governments and what the governments have allowed us to do, and how they've restricted the numbers on boards. And I think the real challenge we all felt was going forward, whether there are proposals at the moment around schools and their future, and how do we ensure that those people in those roles in schools represent the community. And then we looked at a scrutiny report from a number of years back and the progress update on it, which was around post-16 educational attainment. Councillor Gibbs led it on it, and and we saw the sort of the impact and so on, and the success that is happening locally in schools, but then talked about the challenges as well for the future. Thank you.
Can I thank you very much for that. I became aware when I was first involved with this council. The council used to appoint hundreds of school governors across the borough. And I think last year we appointed something like 14 because school governing bodies have been massively reconstituted. Local authority influence has reduced, and they don't have a massive turnover either. So insofar as we have an ability to influence the composition of governing bodies, it's quite limited. We can obviously encourage people and work with our schools to make sure they have the right skills. But that's... I don't know if that's a cause of regret or not. That's a matter of fact. I guess being nostalgic is a cause of regret. Anyway, and so thanks very much for your work on that. And I know that you haven't called any items in this month, which is disappointing, really. Quite. Okay, myself and Councillor Edgar, but particularly myself, have spent about 6 hours being scrutinised on the budget this year, I think. So. Well, 3 last month, and we're looking forward to more if necessary. So We really enjoy that, don't we?
We do.
Yes, it's good, right. And that's what transparency should be about. And earlier on, I waved this in the air before you got here, your transparency report, and I said that we'd reject all the proposals in it. I actually said the opposite of that, but that we're going to take it away and give a considered response. So if we can move on then to item 5.2, Treasury Management Strategy. Again, this is Councillor Edgar.
Thank you. So the Treasury Management Strategy includes 3 strategic statements that we're required by statute to produce, and Treasury Management really is about managing our cash flow. It's about the managing of the resources that we need to fund our capital programmes. It's about making sure we invest that money well. So the good news within this is that our investment income was at a level above the benchmark in the period up to the end of December. So that's great, because it's a useful amount of money that contributes to the services of the council. And there's also within this report a number of tweaks, not major changes, but changes that reflect, for example, the way in which the status of the regulatory environment in which banks operate has changed, so that they are, in some cases, less formally supported by governments. And we've adjusted the proposals are to adjust the strategy and the indicators in response to that. And so this is a report which needs to go on to full council for agreement. And so the recommendations really are that the Mayor is approving the report for submission to full council, which will then make a decision one way or the other on it.
So are there any observations from members of the Cabinet on this? And he said enough, Zena, has he?
Yes, that covers it all.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm minded to recommend it then to the full council as our position. Thank you. So if we move on then to 5.3, HRA account budget reports. I guess this is a three-headed beast. Who wants to go first? Councillor Edgar, go on.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm sure colleagues want to add things. The earlier report that's come to Cabinet was about the 1% rent decrease, which the government has required. It's a significant change in government policy in respect to rent levels, but it will cost £24 million worth of income over the next 4 years. And I imagine individual residents are happy to pay less for their rent, as they'd be happy to pay less for most things, but it clearly does have an impact on the services that can be provided. It has a particular impact on the sort of capital work that can be done in order to keep the homes that we're responsible for in good condition. So this report contains a budget now, having noted that rent increase at an earlier meeting. There's still quite a lot of detail that's outstanding and referred to in this report, detail that we need to get from government when various bits of legislation have made their way through Parliament, things such as the requirement to sell high-value homes when they become empty, and so there have had to be some assumptions made about that, but in this report it assumes that we pay a levy to government, that we don't necessarily sell those homes, but we pay a levy equivalent to our estimate of what it might be. There are also details still to be finalised about the pay to stay scheme that the government's introducing for those people who are paid more than average, though the amounts involved are not particularly high, I don't think, for a couple in London. The government is, in a number of ways, not making it easy for us to spend the money we get from Right to Buy in ways which allow us to provide new homes for people. They limit the contribution that they can make to 30%, that the money needs to be spent within 3 years. There are, however, proposals within this report about how we best use that money, but it will push us and apply pressure to us and put us very close to the borrowing limit. But the Council, I think, has put a lot of work into thinking about how it has, as far as it can, it makes really good use of that money to provide the homes that we all know people really need in the borough. The report also contains a detail of capital programme. I think there's a lot of good work that is planned, so decent homes work on 99 blocks. So clearly that's something which people talk to us about. They talk to all councillors about on a regular basis. They're very interested in getting that work done. It's important that we're making that commitment to do it. Lifts, I know that all of us as councillors will have experienced points where people have complained about lifts going out and the sorts of problems it causes for them. So there are proposals within this to put 24 lifts in 13 blocks, to renew 24 lifts in 13 blocks. Overcrowding is an ever-present issue in the conversations we have with residents, and there's money in this capital programme to help reduce overcrowding. And there are also points at which people need changes made to their home, really important changes that can make a huge difference to their lives and their ability to move around within their home and to enjoy it as well as one would want them to, particularly at very difficult times for them. And so there's money within that capital programme to pay towards aids and adaptation. So that's a brief overview of what is I think, a very comprehensive and diverse report which covers a whole load of issues that we're facing in all sorts of ways in the area of housing at the moment. And I'm sure colleagues might want to add to what I've said.
So, Councillor Islam?
Thank you. Councillor Edgar, that's very comprehensive. Just want to say on the capital programme, so the report asking Cabinet approval for £11.5 million tonight, which will cover 99 blocks, as Councillor Edgar says, but in total will yield 600 decent homes across the borough. This is more kind of window, external repairs, etc., rather than internal decent homes, and the blocks are all listed in Appendix 4. So this is a very small programme compared to the current £185 million or so decent homes programme that we're managing, and I'm meeting officers separately, so to in terms of the delivery plan, just to make sure that lessons have been learned from the current decent homes programme, and this 2016-17 programme delivered at a better standard and more kind of transparent way, I suppose.
So is this the end of the Decent Homes programme? This is the final year, I think. And does that mean that all homes, all council homes in the borough will be at a decent home standard? I think the answer to that is probably fairly complicated, but give it a go.
Stock condition surveys are being done, so the churn, you do decent homes, and then after a few years you kind of got to do it all over again. So a stock condition survey is done, but I think after this 11 programme there will be another small programme just to kind of touch up some of the blocks that we haven't included.
Councillor Blake.
Just to introduce the part of the report that relates to our new build, Appendix 3 sets out the budget for our new build programme going forward and our approach to utilising our right to buy receipts going forward.
I was asked at a meeting the other day if we could identify exactly where we're going to build all these new homes. And I thought I might as well embarrass you in public by asking you then if you have a better understanding of where that is.
We don't know exactly where we're going to build the homes. We are working on understanding our capacity further as to where further infill will come and how that can best work alongside investment in our estates.
Okay, but we have a schedule at the top of page 100 which talks about some of the new build schemes, for example, and there'll be others which are funded elsewhere in this programme. But I think that covers a large chunk of it. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Jolly good. So I'm happy to agree the recommendations set out in the report, and in which case we move on to item 5.4, which is licensing of the private rented housing sector. Now, Peter Golds wanted to speak on this matter. And would it make sense for our Deputy Mayor and Cabinet Member for Community Safety to speak to it? It's not that person, is it? It's Sirajul Islam. It's the Deputy Mayor, Statutory Deputy Mayor, Councillor Islam. Goodness sake.
Thank you, Mayor, and Mr. Todd is there to take any kind of technical question. So the report in front of us is a selective licensing policy, so this is primarily deals with antisocial behaviour and encourages kind of better and stable tenancies between landlord and tenants. So there are three types of licensing. So selective licence, which is in front of you tonight. There's a mandatory licence that covers HMOs, and the additional licensing as well, which kind of covers smaller dwellings that are not covered by the mandatory HMOs. So primarily this is a selective licence scheme, Mayor, and in this report, in page 121, paragraph 3.7 talks about additional licensing. If we need to do that, then there's a separate piece of work that officers will do. So the government did some consultation work around December on extending additional licensing. We're still waiting for the government to make a decision in terms of whether they will extend that or not. If they do so, then we don't need to do anything. If they don't do anything, then the paragraph 3.7, page 121, is saying that we would do further work on this and bring it back to Cabinet as an additional report. So the areas that we are considering to implement the licence scheme is Weavers, Whitechapel, and Spitalfields and Bangla Town, and I should say that we're doing 20% of our private housing stock. This is because government changed the rules last year, so we can no longer do 100% of our private stock, so it's 2020. If we need to extend that, then we need Secretary of State's permission to extend it. I've also need to refer that page 119, we talk about Deregulation Act. This is something the government brought in October 2015, which deals with kind of revenge or retaliatory evictions in the private sector. I asked us to make that explicit because Councillor Blake and I met as renters, and they were very concerned that as a council or local authorities are not taking that seriously, and we are, and I'm talking to Mr. Tully about kind of devising a system of how tenants can kind of report any disrepair that they're concerned with. So the recommendations are set out 1 to 7 in your report, and I should just point out recommendation 7 to you, Mayor, which is I've just lost the recommendation. Okay, so recommendation 7 is asking for you to agree additional license should be considered further as subject to approval with yourself and me as the lead member. So that is depending on what the government direction is with additional licensing. We are planning to go live with this scheme October 2016, so that is the timeline. So there are further work that needs to be done between now and implementation, which Mr. Tully may want to kind of expand further on that. So things like ICT procurement, for example, which we need to do in order to kind of make this effective. And if we need to do the additional bit, then in the meantime we'll consider that as well. So happy to take questions.
Do you want to clarify the last bit that Mr. Tully?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. What it is, it's a matter of looking at the ICT, because there's a quantum of applications that are likely to come forward from the selective licensing scheme in those 3 wards, likely to be about 6,000 applications coming in. We want to be able to make that as user-friendly for applicants, so the applications come online and go directly into our management information system, so reducing the burden costs on administrative staff. So we need 6 to 7 months to get that up and running.
Okay, and either Councillor Islam or Mr. Tully, if you don't know Councillor Islam, Mayor Robin Wales has a scheme in Newham, but I think that was set up under previous regulations which allowed the entire borough to be covered, so we can only cover a smaller proportion, and that's explained in the report. But other than that, is our scheme similar to his, or how does it differ?
Scheme is a selective licensing scheme, and the only difference is we're doing 20%, they've done 100%.
Yes, that's correct. The law changed, and we haven't got a general approval to approve the whole borough as a selective licensing scheme, so that's why we're doing the 20%. In the London Borough of Newham, they also have an additional licensing scheme that is able to cover the whole borough. That originally wasn't asked to be looked at, and with the current consultations going on by the central government to actually reduce the criteria of mandatory licensing, that may mean that any further additional licensing of HMOs will be irrelevant.
Okay, so in terms of the fee structure and the way it works, are we roughly the same as in Newham?
Yes, the fee's got to be sort of the administration of the scheme has to be cost neutral, and we have worked out our fees to that effect and also benchmarked those fees with other London boroughs, and we're pretty much on line with the rest of them.
And on the question of HMOs, traditionally HMOs would be houses in rather low value areas of a local authority area where people would be renting rooms one at a time. Increasingly in Tower Hamlets we're finding HMOs are in well, there aren't many low-value areas left in Tower Hamlets, so they're in relatively high-value areas, such as Councillor Gold's ward and such as most of your wards, street houses, which are then rented out room by room to students. And I think there is a serious anxiety about regulation of those properties and the ways in which they're managed. So can one of you talk us through how we're going to proceed with this? Because I think we need to think very hard about proceeding with this.
Yes, the current scheme for mandatory licences, you've got to be a 3-storey HMO property with 5 or more people from 2 or more households. If you fall into that category, you should have a licence, and you have a mandatory licence which you have to apply for. That's one scheme. The second part that government's consulting on is actually reducing that criteria, so considering houses on 2 storeys or even flats would fall within the mandatory licensing scheme. At the moment, as in other London boroughs, they have an additional licensing scheme that captures those. We don't have that in place presently, and we're waiting to see what the central government consultations are to whether or not that's a process we need to go down.
So currently, just to be clear, if anybody buys a 3-storey house in our borough and turns it into an HMO through their management of it, then they have to register that, and they have to conform with various fire standards, you know, fire safety doors, smoke detectors, all the other bits and pieces that are required. And that is, to not do that is a civil or a criminal offence.
That's a criminal offence, Mayor. Not to do that.
I'm not sure how many landlords in the borough are aware of this. They should be, but anyway, I think anecdotally one hears about anxieties on this. Are there any other members? Well, actually, I have Councillor Goals indicated.
We do so often in this building, speak alike, but the issue I wish to raise was number 7, because in the last 3 or 4, in the last couple of months, I've spoken to people on Chapel House Street, Manchester Road, Christchurch Road and Langbourne Place, all of whom are extremely disturbed at houses suddenly turning into these places of multiple occupation. And I do believe that in a conservation area like Chapel House, which are the little cottage houses, suddenly to find they're now 5 bedrooms. The nadir hit was Langbourne Place, where the management company got in touch with me, where one particular block was being knocked about by dubious builders into 5 bedrooms, and I got onto our planning department, who said, oh, they'd heard nothing about it. I said, well, I can assure you it's being done. And the only reason anybody was able to get an enforcement order was when I went on Rent a Room and discovered this particular shark had already advertised at some staggering sum of money these 5 rooms before he'd knocked one single flat into them, at which point an enforcement order was put in and it was stopped. But I do feel that we ought to be able to use the powers we already have to stop this, because many parts of the boroughs, instead of being in any way mixed communities, are suddenly turning into mini bed sits, because many of these places aren't even bed sits. They're rooms being divided into half where you can scarcely get a bed in, and it's certainly not building anything approaching a sustainable community. And I very much hope we can both look forward to what is put on recommendation 7, but use the powers of the authority we have existing to do what we can to stop this. And I certainly follow on from my predecessor on the council, Councillor Julia Mainwaring, who I remember 15 years ago was talking about this.
And I think anecdotally it's quite a growing problem, and I'm sure other members will want to comment on this. I guess I first came across this. I was a bit naive, I suppose, when I was canvassing I think it was a 3-bedroom council maisonette, 2-storey maisonette in a block, and found that the living room had been partitioned in half to turn it into a 5-bedroom flat with no living room. That people were renting the rooms one each at a time, and indeed there are one or more agencies in Bethnal Green that specialise in this sort of property, and I know there have been some prosecutions lately, but I think we should raise the temperature on this. I'd agree with Councillor Goals, but I had Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs and then Councillor Blake.
Thank you, Mayor. I really welcome the landlord licensing scheme. I know it's something there's been demand for quite a while, and it's a shame we can't do the whole borough anymore, but we are where we are. I wondered if we could just explain a bit more clearly for the record the points around 3.16 in relation to why we've identified the particular wards that we have, just so that that's clear. And I also had a question relating to that, which is what communications we have planned to the whole borough, so that residents understand why certain wards have been included in the licensing scheme and other wards haven't been, just to make sure that that's being proactively managed. Otherwise, we might well get a lot of questions about why certain people's wards aren't subject to this scheme.
The reason we selected those three particular wards, because they have the highest number of private sector dwellings, also highest number of local authority properties as well, because often the complaints that we get is from sort of the 2 bedrooms, the 3 bedroom flats, multiply occupied, and the airspeed associated with that. So this is one of the other reasons that we targeted those 3 particular wards. And in terms of the comms plan, I've already been talking to officers, so our comms press office and Mr. Tolley as well, to develop a comms plan that kind of communication with our residents is very important as well as kind of the media and press and so on, because we need to kind of get a focus of attention, as the Mayor and Councillor Golder said as well, to kind of up the heat on that. So I am in discussion and they're in train.
Do you want to add to that, Mr. Tolley, as well?
The only point I would add is we do have some statutory requirements to make after the decision tonight. We do have to publish a public notice within 7 days of today's decision, and that needs to go out into 2 local newspapers in 6 editions, with no more than a fortnight between them. And we also need to put up a public notice in the area that the scheme comes into play. So straight away there is a statutory public notice, and it's legal terms, legal speak, but I think running alongside that, whereas the statutory deputy mayor said that we are looking at running a campaign to cover those statutory HMOs that should be having licences, and also feeding in to work around the Deregulation Act and the work around retaliatory evictions, to try and tie up a whole package.
Councillor Blake.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak again on recommendation 7, and to say that Councillor Islam and I will be keeping a very close eye on the outcome of the government's consultation on the role of additional licensing, because as Councillor Islam and the Mayor have both suggested, I think some of the worst conditions that we're aware of are possibly in single-storey accommodation but within flatted blocks, due to the nature of our housing stock in Tower Hamlets. So we'll be very keen to see the outcome of the consultation, but should the outcome not go in the direction that we hope, we will be hopefully quite quick to start looking at our evidence base for the case for additional licensing, because I think that it is really quite suitable for the types of homes that are in Tower Hamlets.
And this regulatory power for HMOs is about the management of the dwellings rather than the conduct of the tenants, I think, isn't it? It's worth emphasising that, because quite often the two come together.
Yes, it's slightly different to the selective licensing, where we have to demonstrate the antisocial behaviours coming from the private rented properties, private rented sector. With HMOs, it is around the management standards and the chopping up of premises, as you've spoken about, small rooms with no lights. Yes.
I really welcome that point. I think it's really important, partly because for good landlords this will be a good thing. If landlords are responsible, then we should support them in that and deal with landlords that are less responsible. I just want to say something, because there's been some kind of negative tone about causing ASB or breaking up communities in terms of people living in these types of accommodation. And both when I was a student and for a number of years after I first moved to London, whenever I visited friends, people were pretty much living in individual rooms in shared houses and flats. That accommodation was almost certainly better quality than what a lot of people in the borough are living with. But even people in professional jobs, let alone low paid work, people coming from other parts of the UK, Europe and internationally, people want to live and work in London, and for very many people this is the only way they have of coming to live and stay here. So I think no doubt there are some issues of antisocial behaviour that result from very heavily overcrowded accommodation, but this is a different form of overcrowding. We're very concerned about overcrowding in social housing, as we should be, and I just wanted to remind us of our responsibility to those of our residents who are very seriously overcrowded and paying very high rents in these homes, and our first responsibility is to them, which is why it's really welcome that we'll, through this, be supporting good landlords and holding less good ones to account.
I think that's a very powerful point. It's a bit like young people, where you get a few young people who misbehave, and some crotchety older people then blanket all young people as being yobs, which is not the case. And clearly, this type of accommodation is the only way in which quite a lot of people can afford to live in our borough these days. So there is a need for it, and it needs to be best managed. Councillor Goals.
I suppose my name is now Councillor Meldrew, but may I suggest that looking at number 7 and the view we've had this evening, this would be an occasion where if we could quickly put stuff together to get a joint letter in, possibly to a minister, to say that we have a problem in the borough and we are working on this, and let's get some ministerial support. Because I know lots of local authorities, Westminster and other places, are really concerned about this. So I think this is an opportunity to get a joint letter in as soon as possible.
Happy to consider that. So are there any other members who want to speak on this item? Councillor Izam, you're okay? No? Sharia.
Thank you, Mayor. I really welcome this report. I remember growing up in Tower Hamlets all those years ago. We were actually living in similar conditions back then, where families were having to, 3-4 families having to share 3-4 bedroom houses down Brick Lane. You would have thought that things would change, but obviously not in some areas. I've come across blocks where the condition is structurally really bad. It looks as if it's almost going to collapse. However, you've got people living in bathrooms. I was quite shocked 2 years ago when I was campaigning to come across a group of students. One of them said he uses the bath as his bed. And I just found that really horrific. The ASB that comes out of all this is the amount of waste that's generated from a 2-3 bedroom property where you've got 10 to 12 people living. That waste then becomes the focus of ASB from neighbouring tenants. So I just wanted to say that this is something that we need to implement, and it's a shame it's not borough-wide.
Can I just say that thank you for all those comments. I think I welcome Councillor Gold's suggestion right to Minister to escalate the additional licensing. I mean, if we had done the consultation last year, if you were the mayor, then I'm sure we'd have included both the selective and additional license consultation together. It's a shame that the additional bit was left out when the consultation was carried out July. I think the consultation finished July 2015. Otherwise, we would have included that. So I'm very keen to kind of, consider the additional bit of it. But if you can get some clarity from government in terms of where they're thinking. So their consultation ended on 18th of December. So, roughly 2 months now. If they did extend it to cover the properties that Councillor Saunders has explained, then well and good. I think, we do see people in our surgeries where in a 3-bedroom, effectively, 3 families live in each room because the HMO don't apply to them. That's very little we can do, and therefore the additional license is a very important factor within this license policy.
Okay, and thanks particularly to Councillor Meldrew. And we're I can't remember who he was actually, but anyway. But is it Victor? Okay. Fine. I never watched television. So 5.4. So happy to agree the recommendations, and on item 7, yes, I think that I think we've all agreed that we want to expedite if we can, and do some thinking about this. We also, I think, there's real benefit in publicity on this as well, because we want to encourage good landlords. And it may be worth trailing that we're thinking also about this not-for-profits letting agency. Now, this is a specific thing. It's not designed to put all the estate agents in the borough out of business, although people might want to do that. But it's specifically, we think, going to be useful in terms of people who buy their council property and are then renting them out to private tenants, because there are some real problems on some of our estates where there are absentee landlords who don't have the paraphernalia of a professional landlord. And sometimes the repairs and maintenance of the properties causes a big problem. So that will come to a future meeting. But it's worth signalling that, because that's something we also said when I was elected that we wanted to do. So if we can move on to item 5.5, which is the late night levy for licensed premises. And this is for Sharia Khatun to introduce. And Councillor Golds wants to speak on it. And I think, does the Chair of ONS want to speak on this as well? Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. The late night levy, if introduced, has to apply to all areas within the local authority and is payable by all licence holders for the retail sale of alcohol beginning at a determined period between midnight and ending at or before 6 a.m. The late night levy is charged on top of the current licence fee and is determined by the premises' rateable value. The levy rate ranges from £299 to £4,440, depending on the rateable value of the premises. The net levy must be split between the licensing authority and MOPAC, that's the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, with 70% going to MOPAC. However, MOPAC have agreed that if the levy is adopted in Tower Hamlets, the police proportion will be allocated through the partnership. The licensing authority must pay the 70% at the commencement of the financial year and thus becomes accountable for the collection of the levy fee. The retained monies from the levy must be committed by the licensing authority on tackling the late-night alcohol-related crime and disorder. The late night levy will not apply to temporary event notifications, and the licensing authority can determine if the following premises types can be excluded. For instance, premises with overnight accommodation, theatres and cinemas, bingo halls, community amateur sports clubs and community premises. A reduction of 30% can be applied to premises that are part of a business-led best practice scheme, i.e. best bar none. Before the introduction of the late night levy, the licensing authority must carry out a full and extensive consultation process. This report brings to members' attention the provision that is available to them and whether you would like to consider going out to consultation. If so, members should be minded to consult at bringing in the levy at midnight, as this is the only commencement period that can be supported by the antisocial behaviour and crime statistics. A draft consultation document is included within the report, and a 12-week consultation process will commence if approved here tonight. The results of the consultation will be brought back to Cabinet to determine if the late night levy should be adopted. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks for that. And I'm aware we've had some preliminary conversations about this, and I'm aware that some perfectly well-behaved landlords of very reputable public houses will be rather annoyed at this proposal. I quite understand that. But we do, in some parts of the borough, and in some quite surprising hostelries as well, which might not be in the obvious places of the borough, we do have problems of disorder with late-night drinking. And so on balance, the intention is to go out and consult on this, but I had a number of other members who wanted to speak on it. But first of all, the Chair of ONS, and then Councillor Goals, and then Cabinet members.
Yeah, I can speak to this as a representative of a ward that is deeply affected by the issues that this consultation will seek to resolve. I think there's been a challenge for a number of years, and we've seen the growth in the Shoreditch fringe. And so I think this consultation is really, really welcome. And I hope that what comes out of it is a targeted approach, so that we can get from the police a real commitment to monitor what is happening. But I think this is a really progressive attempt to meet the challenging needs that we have in the community.
Somebody's got their phone next to the microphone.
Maybe me. Maybe me.
Maybe.
Yeah, and I think the challenge around the Shoreditch fringe is that it is on the border with Hackney. And getting cooperation with them and so on, because what we suffer from is people leaving Shoreditch and then walking through our neighbourhoods, causing the antisocial behaviour, and how we work to address that as well would be helpful.
And I think I was fairly clear that if we could find a way of doing it geographically, so we only did one corner of the borough and not everywhere else, then that might make sense. But the regulations are all or nothing, so we're sort of stuck with that unless we think on balance. We should continue to suffer while the rest of the borough behaves itself, and it's a bit of a problem. Councillor Gold.
At a licensing meeting earlier this year, we had the frankly quite shocking figures that showed that levels of antisocial behaviour in what one could call the Greater Shoreditch area exceed those of, here it comes, Covent Garden, Leicester Square, Piccadilly Circus, and that part of the West End combined. And we all disbelieved this until the Metropolitan Police actually arrived and brought the map along with us. So this, I think, is very, very timely. I know there will be some howls of rage from one or two people, but basically, if people are selling alcohol and making it available in the wee hours of the morning, then I hate to say this, they're going to have to, they ought to pay for it. And because if it does lead to antisocial behaviour, then it needs to be cleaned up. I just think it's disappointing that it's 70% Mopac and 30% us. Pity it's not 50-50 or the other way around.
In theory, but Sharia can come back on this, in theory, Mopac say they're going to spend the money in our borough on our priorities. And clearly it needs to be focused on that area. And I think another thing that's exercising me a little bit is whether we have enough capacity for licensing enforcement, which it sounds a very unsexy thing to do, but if you don't have the enforcement capacity in the licensing department, then we're going to be less effective in stamping on bad behaviour, and we need to bear in mind the complaints we get from places where it is a problem. Who else wanted to speak? Councillor Peck.
As the lead member for economic growth, I guess I'm instinctively a bit wary about this, partly because I think there are lots of good pubs that have closed over the years in Tower Hamlets to the detriment of our communities. They're a place that a lot of people value for, you know, the kind of social interaction that they bring, and they're an important part of our community. And we discussed a motion at the last full council that was about, in part, protecting those pubs and the heritage role that they play. It might be that those kind of more community-based pubs aren't the ones staying open after midnight and causing problems, but I'm not sure that we know that. And I think this is one of those issues where actually the consultation response will be genuinely interesting. Sometimes we consult and we have a pretty clear view what's going to be said, but I think this is one where we need to look very carefully at the consultation response and see what it says. And I think the key to this will be where, at the time at which we start it, it might be that there are a number of pubs that are on the edge of being able to trade that close at, say, 12 or 12:30, that this might tip them over, and in fact a kind of 1 o'clock start time might be appropriate. So I'm wary, and I think we need to think carefully about how we do it, and the consultation will need to inform us on that.
Any other members? Well, I certainly agree with that, and yes, emphasise that this is not a council which definitely wants to go ahead with this, although I'm pretty minded that we might well need to, given the behavioural issues outlined by Councillor Golds. But we want to hear from people how it does go ahead. We might make it work in the interests of everybody, and so I'm minded to agree the recommendations. But let's see if Councillor Khatoon wants to change her mind.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't want to change my mind. However, there will be a few people, like Councillor Golds has pointed out, who will actually object. And those could be those businesses that are not doing so well financially. There could be a bit of a backlash from there. There could be a small backlash from residents who are already subjected to ASB-related issues. They might think that by having extending the opening hours will cause more ASB-related issues. But the consultation should be an interesting one to see what the outcome is.
Okay.
And sorry, the 70%, we just have to monitor through the Community Safety Partnership that the pledge that the Met Police have given us, that they will reimburse, give us back the money through the Community Safety Partnership is actually monitored and is adhered to.
Okay, grateful for that. And when it comes back to us, it'd be interesting to hear what other enforcement, just as part of the report and for the public record, what other enforcement weapons lie in our hands if places are causing a problem. Because obviously we can use powers with the police to close premises if they're behaving improperly. So we want to have a genuine consultation, like I said. So I'm happy to agree the recommendations that we got for consultation on this policy. Yeah, I'm very happy to. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I was tempted to say, for the party of deregulation to be supporting this regulation tells us that there's something wrong, but there clearly is something wrong in parts of our borough. Yeah. Okay. But 5.8 6 is the LIP delivery plan. And any officer who doesn't need to stay, by the way, one thing I haven't done this evening is thank enough officers for all the good things they're doing, apart from the bad ones, of course. So can I do that? But 5.6 LIP delivery plan is Margaret.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to introduce the report. This report, the scheme which are to be included in the CLC Capital Programme for 2016-17, which are primarily traffic and highway improvement funded through TFL LIP funding. And it is also includes in an additional £650,000 for funding for 2015-16 programme, which has recently been approved by TFL Central London Cycle Grid Scheme for immediate delivery of scheme along Virginia Road to Hackney Road. Financial regulation require the adoption of capital estimates for specific scheme to authorize the expenditure by council officer on their delivery. In order to ensure the efficient delivery of the work programme, this report seeks approval for adoption of capital estimated for all new scheme in the CLC capital programme on the basis of the budget allocation listed in Appendix 1. The highway improvement framework contract will be the main route for delivery of this work. The funding will provide for making the 20-mile-per-hour Bora wide limit permanent and delivery of key scheme proposed in the new cycle strategy, as well as the corridor improvement along Ben Jonson Road and Crib Street, which aim to tie in with recent regeneration initiative. Rothbury Road in Hackney Wick will be the resurface, and the traffic management along Manchester Road will be enhanced. And the following a large petition of reinstatement of the cobbles in Perry Place off Roman Road is also prioritized for action. And I think this is an exciting program of innovative work for coming year, and which will show how the council is helping transform the quality of the street environment. A cabinet workshop is being organized for April to develop this program further. Thank you.
Can I thank you, Councillor Meir, for your work on this? And do you need to add anything, Margaret? You don't have to. Okay. Okay, I was going to say two things. The first is the 20-mile-an-hour zone. We need to review the monitoring reports on that before we finally confirm it. And I think this was raised as a question at the council meeting. So a number of other London boroughs have implemented it, but we need to, based on evidence, look at what it's achieved in our borough and what else we need to do to make it work effectively. We're going to keep it.
We're scheduling a review of that for September because we need to make a decision before October on whether to make the experimental order permanent or not. So the full year's experiment is complete by the end of March, and then we'll be doing all the review work working up to September Cabinet. Okay, thank you. And it's worth noting that there are some divergences of opinion on this, not in the Cabinet, I don't think, but in the wider community. The second thing I want to say is that this may look like a fairly dry sort of report, but I'm very clear as Mayor that getting the street environment into a good state of repair and maintenance will help improve road safety, pedestrian safety, public safety, the sense of safety in the environment, and people's feeling of an environment that's being looked after as well. So I think it's very important in a dense borough like this that we look at ways in which we can improve our street scene. One thing in particular, we're about to consult on some proposals for Cable Street, and we haven't, in my view, got them quite right yet. And again, we're going to consult with people, and I guarantee that when we do consult, people will come back with very strong views in different directions about what we're doing. But the main ambition is to get rat-running traffic off Cable Street, because it's been a plague there for years. And indeed, I can hang my badge up on this, because when I was first elected in 1838, in 1988, I'm slightly exaggerating, only slightly though, when I was first elected in 1988, this was a big deal in Cable Street, and we've never managed to get Transport for London or its predecessors to agree that we can go ahead with this. But we're hopeful that this time we can do some things which will give people some relief in that area. I think Cable Street is quite an ambitious scheme, and we are doing an area-wide consultation to raise awareness of the scheme, but I think that will be the start of a conversation and a level of detail that we need to talk to different groups in that area about So I would anticipate a consultation going on for some months to get that right.
Are there any other observations on this? Councillor Blake and Councillor Islam.
I just wanted to note the investment that's being made in the housing zone area, because a key feature of this is improving the connectivity of that area, because without this kind of investment the scale of growth planned for this area will not be feasible, and so we do need to keep thinking about how we provide the transport connectivity and infrastructure to allow for growth within the borough.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because it reminds me that we've had conversations outside of these meetings about the housing zone, and we generally support it, but we want to make sure that the offer that comes out of it for local people is a sufficiently attractive one that we want to really thunder ahead with it. And at that point we can certainly commit the funds to it. If it's just more buy-to-let investment, which doesn't really integrate with the needs of the community, then I'm a bit worried about that. But Councillor Islam.
On zebra crossings, I mean, on page 155, we're putting halos next to Elisha Beacon, but there are some zebra crossings outside school which are not in a very good condition, and worth kind of looking at those and see whether we can improve them. Because Elisha Beacon and halos are fine for visibility, but if the surface is kind of worn with years of use, then that I think causes some health and safety risk as well. And just an observation on page 147. Paragraph 5.5, Superior Place is actually opposite Albert Jacob House, not Albert Bishop House.
Any other comments members need to make? I'm very happy to agree the recommendations in the report, and in which case we can move on and thank Margaret for her work on this. Community Safety Partnership Plan Review and Extension, Councillor Khatoun.
Thank you, Mayor. What we're asking for today is to extend the current CSB plan, which ends in March this year. Some of you will probably be asking, why hasn't that been presented before? There was a range of issues which resulted in not being able to present here. First of all, we were not in administration. That was the main one that I'd like to point out. It should have been the CSB extension, or a new one should have been agreed on the 25th of February 2015. However, the meetings are co-chaired by the Borough Commander and the Community Safety Lead. So my predecessor, Councillor Ohid Ahmed, was absent in that meeting, and so therefore the Borough Commander decided not to agree on the extension. And so then we went into the election court issues and the PERDA period. Finally, on the 22nd of July, thanks to a victory with you as the Mayor, we were able to discuss at the CSB meeting the importance of extending the CSB plan, which CSB members were happy with. However, it had to be brought back to this administration, i.e. MAB, which it was, and we are here tonight asking for a formal extension of the CSB plan. There has been a few tweaks to the plan, so we've added prostitution as a target, which is now a standalone priority in the CSB plan, as well as ASB and arson. Previously, ASB covered arson, but now we've separated those. So these are the few tweaks that's been made to the CSB plan. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, do any members want to add to this? All right, Councillor. Oh, yes, yes, we have a pre-scrutiny question. Do you want to read it out?
Yeah, so I'll just go through it. So the pre-scrutiny question is in regards to the prevent and the FGM context, in regards to teachers and those professionals where intervening and referring people onto particular courses of action And the question is, does the Council and its partners ensure that not only that there are the thresholds in place, but the partners and the agencies at the different levels of staff, especially frontline, know what these thresholds are? Just about awareness. Thank you.
Okay.
This is something I'm very passionate about, as you know, Mayor. With regards to FGM, there are teachers with designated responsibilities in each school to pick up on issues around FGM and make the appropriate referrals. With regards to Prevent, there's a huge amount of training that has been available and is available. For instance, RAP training is one of those that schools and agencies are implementing. So we do have trained professionals who should know what the thresholds are and how to make appropriate referrals. I don't know if Shazia wants to add anything to that.
Hi, just to add on to that, thank you, Councillor, just to bring on board on that, the way we deliver both of these are very much in partnership with a multidisciplinary approach. We have children's services, our statutory providers and ourselves working together on this. And along with having very clear pathways which are agreed through various subgroups, safeguarding boards, we make sure those referral pathways, flowcharts are really clear, really concise, and we try to embed it, not just talking about Prevent and FGM around safeguarding. That's the language which works within our communities. So we've been really pushing it around that. We have various panels and forums through MASH, through our social inclusion panel for Prevent and SAB, which are worked in conjunction with our partners, again, to manage it in a very holistic way. And we hold people to account. If we're not happy with what our police colleagues say, we challenge it. If we're not happy with the training and the feedback we get, we work with our parental engagement team and our teachers, and we put in bespoke training and support for them as well. We've been really lucky this year. We've got additional funding through MOPAC to deliver some training around harmful practices. And we have leads within Royal London Hospital who do some training for clinical staff and for teachers as well. And we've got advocates who also reach out and promote the messages around what's appropriate referral, when do you step in, who do you talk to as well. One of the things we've talked through in our directorates is expanding this training to members as well, senior managers. It's something Councillor and Stephen Halsey and we talked about earlier today, and VOG training as well. It's something that's open to everyone, and it sort of covers the basics around what is national guidance, because we're also guided by DFE, by the Home Office. We meet their statutory requirements, but also in practice, how do we deliver this and what are the checks and balances to do this? We don't always get it absolutely right, and we're happier to have more referrals come to us and we to say, actually, that's not appropriate, than not get them at all. So the fact that we're getting more referrals through, we're seeing those numbers increasing, we're seeing that as a positive thing and something we need to manage as well.
Thank you for that. The training is really welcome, and we had a really good discussion about it last night as well, so thank you.
Okay, so just for the record, that was Shazia Ghani, who's our Head of Community Safety, in case anyone wondered. That's all right, you didn't introduce yourself. So no other comments from members. I'm very happy with the recommendations. I think it's the case, actually, that all London boroughs will be deferring their review of this, because we're all waiting on the edge of our seats for a new London mayor to set their new priorities. Is that roughly correct?
We did do a quick appraisal of other London boroughs, and most of them align with the Police and Crime Act. We have two which did not do so, and they've extended for an additional year, and they will see how it goes. They've said we'll take a chance on that. But most of the others do align with the Police and Crime, which started in 2013, as we did.
Okay. I'm not absolutely sure that was an answer to the question I asked. But anyway, yes. But let's assume it was. Yes. Thank you very much. So thanks very much for all your work on this, Shazia, and keeping Sharia on the straight and narrow. But and all the work that Sharia is doing on this with her walkabouts and road shows, and the work on antisocial behaviour and. Oh, you'll do it.
No, she's been very
okay.
Got a very wonderful.
Okay. Okay, so can we thank Shazia for the work that Sharia takes credit for then? So if we move on then, thank you very much to 5.8, which is determination of school admission arrangements for 2017-18. Rachel Saunders.
Thank you. So this report asks you to agree our admissions for community nursery schools and classes, community primary schools, community secondary schools, schemes for coordinated admissions to reception year and year 7, in-year admissions, and to agree the planned admissions number for each school in Tower Hamlets as set out. The Tower Hamlets School Admissions Forum, which is representative of all the key stakeholders in the admissions process, has discussed and agreed what's in front of you. In the nursery school admissions arrangements, there were changes made last year. There are no proposals to make further changes this year. There are no proposals to alter the existing arrangements and overscription criteria for admission to primary schools. And in the secondary school admission arrangements, there are no proposals to change the existing overscription criteria for admission to secondary schools. However, it's proposed that we modify our testing arrangements for pupil ability banding. I think it's important to be clear that the fact that the changes are not significant doesn't mean that we are complacent or relaxed in any way about the vital importance of parents and children getting, the best possible place for them and their family at the school that they want to study at. There's some data in here which indicates that our percentages are not bad. So the percentage of Tower Hamlets children securing place at one of their top 3 schools in the primary school admission arrangements is above London averages. But there's always more we can do, and that also obviously relates importantly to the pupil place planning work that's come to Cabinet before.
Does anyone need to add to this? No? Do members have any questions on the report? Councillor Blake.
Can I just make the same observation I think I've made before about the under 5s and how that application process isn't coordinated, and how under 5 outcomes may or not, but may benefit from additional coordination.
So you made that comment. It's been noted with a yep. But does that lead to any action which would make things better coordinated?
Yes, there will be. Sorry.
Rachel, sorry. Okay, this is Terry Bryan, who is our head of pupil admissions and exclusions.
I think I said it.
I know that once he's got started on the microphone, it's hard to stop him. Go on.
I promise to be on good behaviour this evening. In the answer to the question from the councillor, I think it's evident from the consultation and indeed the feedback from members and schools that there is a need to ensure that there is continuity between admissions to nursery and when children move into primary school at reception. So the suggestion or the idea of coordinating admissions at the point of entry to nursery will prove beneficial, and the authority, even though this is a non-statutory requirement, will be consulting with the public and its schools at the next juncture, which will be later this year, so you'll be seeing me again shortly. And we will be encouraging our partners to adopt that approach, whereby we think we'll be able to put in place arrangements that will be fair and accessible to parents and children.
So does that mean, I'm tempted not to ask this, but does that mean that some parents and some under 5s are disadvantaged as a result of the current situation?
It means that at the minute, because admissions arrangements are not coordinated, there's always a possibility. The decisions are not made in one central agency, and there's always a possibility for an inconsistency of approach, which could result in some pupils being disadvantaged. I wouldn't be able to say that categorically at this juncture. But what I can say that if the admissions were handled centrally, and if we found the resources to do that with the help of our partner agencies, i.e. schools, that we would ensure there was a more consistent approach and limit the potential for children and families to be disadvantaged.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to agree the recommendations set out in the report, and happy to move on. But before I move on, I just need to go backwards to 5.7 just to note that in agreeing the recommendations, this is actually referred to the full council meeting. That the safety plan needs to be considered by the full council. So thank you very much, sir. 5.9, key stage examinations 2, 4 and 5. 3 done wrong? Rachel Saunders.
So, in general, this is really good news. There's real success and success upon success, so fantastic results which have got better at all levels. There's more we can do at A level and more generally in 16 to 18, but we're still moving in the right direction, which is fantastic. So I'll go into a little bit more detail, but in summary, what I think I want to say is success more needed at 16 to 18. This success is despite the political issues that have been had over the last period. I think there are other parts of the system, certainly within my portfolio, where you can see political failure of leadership has led to drift in some parts of the council, but schools have extraordinary leadership. Parents remain incredibly supportive and young people continue to achieve. So there is more we can do now, I'm sure, and of course we continue to be hugely ambitious for children and young people in the borough. There is, however, a big risk on its way in that we know that the government is looking at funding of schools, and the chances are our funding will reduce. So that's something we'll do all we can to campaign influence on. But this is extraordinary success, testament to the hard work of any number of individuals and groups of people and really brilliant schools leadership. But it is at risk because of what the government's saying about funding. So just to give a little bit more detail on that, in Key Stage 2, 92% of pupils achieved level 4 or higher, compared with 89% nationally, which is a 2% increase on last year, whilst nationally performance was the same as the year before. In writing, 89% of pupils got level 4 or higher, compared to 87% last year, and higher than the national, which is 87%. In maths, 91% of pupils achieved level 4 plus, compared to 87% nationally, which is a 1% increase on last year. So that's just a flavour of the improvement, which sees us 10.8 percentage points above the national average of the 5. Oh no, sorry, I missed that bit. So that's the Key Stage 2 attainment, which is fantastic. On GCSE results, we're 8.9 percentage points above the national average on the 5 HC, including English and maths measure, and 3.7 percentage points above the London average. So we are moving forward significantly ahead of the country as a whole and significantly ahead of London averages on GCSE results. Some of the groups where we need to do more and better, white British pupils are 15 percentage points below the borough average, which is something that needs particular focus and work. In general, girls continue to do better than boys. I don't think that's a bad thing, but it means there's a particular area of focus in terms of bringing up standards and attainment. The only reason I don't say is it would be great for everyone to be equal, but there was a very long period of time where boys did better than girls, and that was broadly considered to be okay and no one really noticed, and now girls are doing better than boys and everyone's desperately worried. So it's a good thing that we're all moving ahead and we're all continuing to do better than we did last year, which is fantastic. The pupils of a Somali background, where I know there's a strong interest in this council, it's a cohort of 92 pupils for GCSEs. 59.8% achieved 5 ACE, including English and Maths, which is 4.8 percentage points below the borough average. There are no national comparative figures for this group. So still great attainment, which the conversation we had at the Somali Task Force showed us it has been getting better over time, but somewhat behind the borough as a whole, so some work to do there as well.
Questions?
Where I failed to turn the page. So the provisional figures exclude Hamlet's College, but the national averages won't be available for some time, but overall an increase in the pass rate of 0.1%, which takes us back to the frankly extraordinary level of 98.1% established in 2013, which had a small fallback last year. There is clearly work to do in terms of A-level results. So the pass rate is good by any standards, I think it's fair to say, but it'd be great to see more higher grades, and we think that there are a number of issues, including sixth forms offering too many subjects, which means that often students are taught in groups too small to allow the full development of ideas, which will become increasingly untenable as school budgets come under challenge. So Councillor Pearce mentioned the scrutiny review that's done previously by Councillor Whitelock-Gibbs, which I was also a part of at the time. So there is continuing progress on 16 to 18, but more to do on A-levels and more to do in general on our 16 to 18 offer.
So can I thank you for all your work on that, Councillor Saunders, and your interim executive director. And before long, we'll be making an announcement about our permanent executive director. All that's needed is for the cabinet members to indicate whether they're happy with the recommendation that's in front of them, and then we can confirm a decision. But and they might get round to it. Otherwise, by default, it will happen in a couple of days' time, I think. The other thing I wanted to say, yes, is I do tend to disagree with Councillor Saunders. I've never skipped with joy at the relative underattainment of girls as against boys, but equally I think particularly with young men, particularly in some bits of the community, if their skills levels are condemning them to underemployment and underachieving their potential, then that's going to be a big loss for a lot of us, for all of us as a community. So obviously, and I'm sure you're making that point slightly flippantly, but it's a very serious point that we need to get our standards up. Also, I know we've been doing some conversations in other places about, with the rising school leaving age, making sure we have an offer which is going to be attractive and effective in getting kids who stay on now until 19 to achieve their potential and be well motivated. Are there any other comments on this? No. In which case I'm happy to agree the recommendations set out in the report. And if we move on then to item 5.10, which is the draft outline strategic plan. Now I've got a feeling that I need to introduce this report, and so yes, so this has been tweaked a couple of times outside of the Cabinet, and I'm very happy to recommend it as part of the process of pulling the Council's policies and priorities together and setting direction. And I think it's quite... Is Mr. Q in here? Yeah. Do you want to say anything about it and how it fits into the process of the Council, Mr. Q? Yes. Do you want to go... Just quick, because it's quite important part of the... It's one of the crown jewels of the authority, if you like, in terms of setting our policy direction. And policy wonks like Mr. Kewin will get very excited about... No, well, we're Council collectively should be very...
Yes, so the strategic plan really is the central overarching part of our performance management framework, and what is set out in the plan within the pack is the outline strategic plan. So that sets out the high-level priorities and the objectives and a supporting narrative about our key priorities over the next 3 years. It also sets out our sort of top 50 performance indicators with which we're going to track our progress over the next 3 years. As I say, it is the outline plan, so what we're doing now, once this is agreed, or if this is agreed today at Cabinet, we're working with officers and lead members to develop the delivery plan, which will set out the more detailed actions and milestones that will help deliver the priorities, and that is scheduled to come back to this meeting in April.
So thank you for that. And if you turn to page 286, there's a little chart which isn't very multidimensional, but basically it talks about the two priority outcomes. One being about, in essence, a excellent level of public services to be experienced by everybody. That may include things like the cleanliness of our streets, the local environment, quality of housing in the borough, crime and antisocial behaviour, which again comes up again and again and again as a theme for all parts of the borough. And all communities, and the other priority one, is about focusing our resources on the bits of our community and the bits of our geography that need particular attention in terms of their needs and our need to help people. So it's about a really excellent high quality services that we want to develop for everybody, and focus within that or alongside that on reaching harder to move groups of people in terms of getting people to grab the opportunities available to them. And so there's a lot more work to be done on that. Are any members keen to contribute to this discussion? I'm very happy if you're not. I'm very happy if you are. I'm totally indifferent either way, actually, no. But this is going to come back. I'm not totally indifferent. This is really important stuff. It's going to come back in with greater flesh on it in the next few months. And we thank Mr. Kewen for his work on this, and Ms. Russell for her work before she departed. Okay, I'm happy to agree with the recommendations. So if we can move on then to item 5.12, which is listing the Mayor's individual executive decisions. Why have I lost 511? I'm glad. Oh yes, right. Right. Goodness me, I'm glad you reminded me of that, because this is in many ways the most important report on the agenda. For reasons that will become clear when I talk about it. So I'm going to introduce this report, and perhaps we could start with Kevin Kewen introducing this report actually, and then I can say a bit about it, because it is quite important that we note the purpose and progress.
Yeah, so this is an early draft of our 6-month progress update, which we are due to send to the Secretary of State by mid-March. It sets out progress against our best value plan, and within that plan there are 7 action plans, and they're detailed on page 296. In terms of those 7 action plans, we've essentially substantially delivered all the activities within the plans relating to elections and the recruitment of statutory officers. In relation to the other 5 plans, progress is strong, and there is a detailed update within the pack. Most of the actions are now complete. We're on track to deliver nearly all of the actions within the plan by the end of May. And what we've done with this 6-monthly update to the Secretary of State is try to set out a bit more clearly what the outcomes that we're trying to deliver through this best value plan and the progress we've made against them.
So thank you for that. And I wanted to say a few things. I know members have other meetings to go to, but this is really very important stuff for the authority. So a lazy view of this report would be to say that things went wrong at Tower Hamlets and they led to the by-election, which resulted in my election as mayor. The commissioners were sent in, and we can just tidy things up and move along. I think we need to be a little bit more comprehensive in that. First of all, those facts are, I think, true. The commissioners were sent in. They had to agree an action plan. The council brought the first draft of its best value action plan to the cabinet under the previous mayor. That was agreed. That was sent to the Secretary of State, and this is heading towards the second progress report. So it's the second 6-month report on progress with the action plan. As Mr. Kewen said, there are 7 areas where we need to address ourselves, and a number of them are reaching a conclusion. But I think it would be, I think the council needs to reflect, and indeed I've been reflecting a lot, and the cabinet has quite a lot as well. And so I just want to put this on the public record on the circumstances and the background work that's taken place since we adopted this plan. And I think it's fair to say, without any particular criticism directed in any particular place, that to simply categorise this as a political failure without looking under the bonnet, if you like, of the council and the way in which it's organised and managed its processes would be a mistaken interpretation of what's happened. So clearly there were political issues which grabbed the headlines and which I think other people need to grapple with outside of this meeting, and hopefully which I, as the leader of this authority, am grappling with in my day-to-day work as the Mayor of Tower Hamlets. But underlying that, there's a number of things about the way in which we did stuff. And so the action plans on procurement, on grants, on property and disposals, on communications, on the organisational culture, and on the way in which we managed our elections are pretty important. I've left out the one about recruitment of statutory officers because that was simply an action to get a move on and recruit nice people like Mr. Tuckley and Ms. Clay and the other one, Zena Cook. Our 3 statutory officers who are now in post, and we're proceeding with the recruitment of other senior officers into the council. On the other 6 areas, I think when we delve into them, we find that, as I said, to simply focus on political behaviours wouldn't be adequate. If we look at procurement, I think we found that there were habits, customs and practices which are probably quite common in other authorities as well, which when you look at them in detail suggest that you need to sharpen up the way in which you manage your procurement, your property and disposal. An example of that would be that this has caused some grief for some people, that we have approaching 100 community buildings, and the terms on which they're rented out to people or allocated to people without any rent being paid, or with or without legal agreements, is more or less random, in some cases historical, and leads to us having some assets which are in a very bad state of repair, and some organisations which possibly don't provide the rest services but which are sitting on valuable buildings. And there are some really excellent projects as well in council buildings who need to be resourced and supported better. In terms of our elections, I think sometimes that it's not really appropriate for a politician to talk about the way in which we organise our elections, but suffice to say that one of the requirements of our new Chief Exec, Mr Tuckley, is to put together a proper action plan and address the way in which we organise ourselves for our future elections in Tower Hamlets, whether it be of members of the council or in his other roles as well. We need to make sure we're fit for purpose in those. And I'll leave the most contentious things for last, if you like. So grants and communications and organisational culture have all been the more challenging areas to work on. That doesn't mean that a lot of work hasn't been spent on the others, but as regards all of those, perhaps before I even address them, I should say that when I was first elected, the Best Value Plan was scrutinised by the commissioners with members invited to attend. I now chair the Best Value board with commissioners in attendance and with representatives from the CLG in attendance as well. We take that very seriously. We're working on all of these areas, as I said. The three more challenging ones in no particular order, I guess, are communications, where the headline is about the way in which we've published East End Life, or not published East End Life, and we're heading towards a point where we will no longer publish East End Life. The backstory to that is we have appointed an interim service head for communications who will stick his hand up in the air. It's at the back of the room on the left there. Mr. C. King, as C. Kings, as in multiple helicopters, and that's my bad sense of humour. Sorry. And it was previously in Hillingdon and prior to that in Haringey, but we all make mistakes. And that's my sense of humour, by the way. Again, just in case you spotted, it wasn't. But his job is to try and put together our communications department and think about how we can have a different approach to communications, which isn't as reliant on East End Life and weekly publications as it has been, but make sure we get our message across. Recognises that our communication strategy isn't just about telling people when their bins will be emptied and so on, but is also very important in terms of community cohesion and getting messages about the leadership role we offer and the opportunities we can offer to people across Tower Hamlets. The grants action plan which we're developing, and obviously that was a very contentious area in relation to the removal of the previous mayor. Rachel Saunders has been doing work, and we are consulting as a borough on our voluntary and community sector strategy. That's an important part of the foundations. We've also been looking at the community buildings and how we might allocate those in a more systematic way to community organisations. And we're looking at the machinery of how we process grants, and crucially at the way in which members are involved in the consideration of grants. So we need to move absolutely away from the culture in which it was perceived, whether it was the case or not, that a member would a mayor or a lead member would, in a room, discuss and alter recommendations without there being proper scrutiny and accountability. So we need to have a system for grants which is considered by the executive, properly evaluated by officers, scrutinised probably by ONS committee, and is something that's driven by policy and no perception of it being about patronage, and which regains confidence and adds value to the way in which we provide our services. And the final thing then is about organisational culture, where we need to do some work, and we've been doing some work. This is quite difficult to get your head around as a concept, but it's essentially about the way we behave towards each other, about our transparency and openness, and about the way in which the authority wants to be seen by the outside world as well. And I think it's got as much to do with the culture in which we want this community to be perceived, whether it's an inward or an outward-looking culture, and I tend towards the latter. I guess all mayors probably would claim to tend towards the latter, being outward-looking, but this is the most exciting place in the world, so we need to make sure that people who live here benefit from it, and we don't get ourselves into a tangle in which our behaviours are too introspective or too discourteous. It's already the case, because of my benign role, of course, or probably not because of my benign role, that the council meetings have better behaviour than they've had in the past. It's less of a ding-dong than it has been. and we as leaders need to make sure that that happens. I think I may have gone on a bit too much, but I think the reason I have a little is because this is really significant stuff which led almost to the shutdown by government of the council and its takeover. The intervention by the government was very serious. We occasionally joke to each other that we want to get the commissioners out the door as soon as possible so we can get back to focusing on our day job. And we do need to do that, but we need to do so having regained the confidence of the CLG and our sponsoring ministry that we are fit to do that. And I'm confident we'll be there fairly soon. And I'm hoping that by saying this and by members listening to us and this perhaps being broadcast as well and forming part of the record, that it makes clear that we are very, very serious about doing this, and we're very focused on the changes we need to make and are making. And rapidly we will be in a point where this will be a bit of history, but a bit of history that we won't forget. So I wanted to say those things. And if any members want to comment on them, I'm very pleased to hear your comments. And if you don't, I'm slightly less pleased, but nevertheless content. Councillor Saunders.
Just because you mentioned the work on grants, which, as you said, is continuing, I just thought it might be worth putting on the record how important our collective role as a mayor and cabinet also is in being clear with our local communities that things have changed, because there's still any number of challenging conversations where people think that things are done as maybe they were before, and we can be very clear that that's not right and that we're moving forward, but it's a broader sense of how we move the whole of our community forward, both to be clear that we're acting with transparency and integrity, which I think is really important to all local residents, and also that where we commission services or give grants, then that's done in a clear, transparent way, not on the basis of who's friends with who or patronage or anything else. So I think we've moved 100 steps forward in terms of how this council operates under your leadership, and I think the next step is for all of us to be united in communicating that shift to organisations and individuals externally, which isn't a simple or easy thing.
Thanks for that, and thanks for all your work on that. Councillor Islam.
Thank you. Mayor, and I welcome this report. I think, Mayor, after the election, I know you've engaged very positively with the commissioners, and I think your kind of leadership and commitment is the testimony of this positive report in front of us. So I think we should really congratulate you on the work you've done. I think with the confidence the commissioners have in your chairing the West Valley Review Board, as well as the directly managing the council by commissioners removed by the Secretary of State the 29th of October, and the progress that we're making on some of those, then the 7 key elements that you've explained a little earlier. So it's a really good report, but I want to just, on 4.5298, page 298, talks about some milestones to be achieved, so voluntary community sector strategy procurement report, and it says completion by May 2015. I think that probably should be May 2016.
Yes. A forensic criticism, which I was looking forward to, but yeah, no, okay. Well, I don't like being praised particularly, which is bizarre, isn't it? But there we are. Let's not go into that. But thank you very much. That's very kind of you, and I didn't ask you to say that, and I sort of wish you hadn't. But there we are. But can I thank Councillor Edgar as well, by the way, because he's done a bit of work on the procurement and other stuff which we need to get right, and our officers who've been working on this under leadership previously of Mr. Halsey and currently of Mr. Tuckley. I'm very grateful for that. So happy to note the report, and as I said, this is a draft. I think the way it works, does the final report come to Cabinet, or does it come to Cabinet for noting after it's gone in?
Yeah, so this report is coming to this meeting now. It won't be returning back. We're asking for the delegation to yourself and the Chief Executive to make any changes before it's submitted.
Okay, happy to do that. Thank you very much. So finally then, we move on to item 5.12, which is for noting, really. It's the Mayor's individual executive decisions. As you know, I asked for this to be recorded at every meeting. You can find them all on the internet. I don't think any of them are fantastically exciting. The Partnership Task Force programme was the biggest in terms of its impact, I think, and that was about the process by which we procure police officers and renew that with the Metropolitan Police Service. So unless there are any questions on any of this, I'm happy to note it. Any questions? No? In which case, I think I'm able to go back to the beginning and start again. I'm able to declare the meeting closed, am I? Any other unrestricted business that's urgent? Sadly none, so we must part. Thank you very much.